Not every face, not every voice, but the feeling of it, yes. The way grown people could look straight at a child and speak as if she were already finished with life before it had properly begun. I heard it often enough to know its many shapes. Some said it kindly, which was worse in its own way. Some said it cruelly, which at least had the decency of being honest. They said I was too serious, too plain, too stubborn, too slow to charm anybody, too quick to notice what ought not be noticed. They said I would never become anything. They said girls like me spent their whole lives carrying buckets, mending shirts, burying hopes, and calling it womanhood. My name is Molly Carter, and for a long time I believed them just enough to be dangerous to myself. Not fully. Never fully. Some hard little piece inside me would not let their judgment settle clean. But I carried it. I carried every word. I carried it through one rented place after another, through failed crops that belonged to other men, through winters where the walls let in cold, and summers where the rooms smelled of old grease and damp flour. I carried it while my mother stretched meals past reason, and my father wore himself down chasing wages that vanished as soon as they were earned. By the time we turned toward Arizona, I was old enough to understand what desperation looked like when decent people tried to dress it up as a plan. No one called it desperation, of course. My father called it a chance. My mother called it land. The rest of the world called it a joke. The parcel came to us through a chain of bad luck, favors half kept, and a debt someone wanted cleared without paying real money. A man my father had once known wrote that there was a tract out in a remote stretch of the Arizona desert, so far from town that even the road gave out before you reached it. The ground was rocky. The soil was mean. There were no proper trees, no standing house, no creek, no nearby neighbors, no sensible reason for a family to settle there. That was exactly why no one wanted it. Which was exactly why a family like ours could get it. When the news spread, people laughed as if they had been handed something sweet. Tom Carter means to bake bread on stones now? In that country, they'll be praying over a dry bucket by July. There's not enough shade out there for a lizard to die comfortable. I heard them all. My mother, Evelyn, heard them too, though she never gave them the satisfaction of flinching. She stood beside the wagon with her sleeves rolled, tying down boxes with fingers gone rough at the joints, her mouth set in that quiet line that meant she had no energy left for foolish people. My father, Thomas, only nodded and kept loading tools as though ridicule weighed no more than dust. My brothers, Ben and Caleb, were too young to measure danger properly. They saw a wagon journey. They saw distance. They saw adventure, because children will call almost anything by that name until hunger teaches them better. I saw the truth as best I could. We were leaving because staying had failed us too many times. The farther west we traveled, the less the world seemed built for human mercy. The towns thinned first. Then the farms. Then even the fences disappeared until the land opened wide and bare beneath a white, pitiless sky. The road turned from road to track, and from track to guesswork. Heat rose off the ground in wavering sheets. Dust found its way into our hair, our eyes, our teeth, the folds of every blanket and bundle we owned. My lips split at the corners. My skin felt too tight across my face. Water became the center of every thought without anyone needing to say so aloud. Save that cup for sundown. Wet the cloth, not your throat. Don't spill a drop. That desert had a way of stripping speech down to what mattered. The land itself looked ancient and unbothered. Long red ridges, broken shelves of stone, mesquite twisted low as if the wind had pressed it there by hand, cactus standing armed and patient, dry washes that seemed empty until you imagined rain rushing through them hard enough to turn them murderous. By day, the heat sat on us like a blacksmith's weight. By night, the cold came so quickly it felt personal, though I would later learn the desert is not personal at all. That was one of the first lessons it taught me. It does not hate you. It does not love you. It does not notice you, unless you learn how to notice it first. My father drove in silence most of the way. When he spoke, it was always practical. Wheels slipping, shift left. Canvas loose, tie it again. Don't let the boys waste their strength running. My mother counted everything. Water jars, flour sacks, salt pork, coffee, matches. She had a mind that measured survival in small, exact numbers, and I think now that if we lived, it was because she knew how to see a winter hidden inside a handful of meal. On the third evening, with the light turning copper over the rocks and the wagon creaking like an old ship, she looked out over all that emptiness and said, "If this place kills us, it will do it honestly." My father held the reins loose in his hands and answered, "Then we'll meet it honestly." I said nothing. But I remember that moment because it was the first time I understood we were past turning back, whether anyone admitted it or not. We reached the land near sundown, 2 days later. I had imagined many things on that journey, and none of them were as bare as the truth. There was no field, no welcoming patch of workable ground, no proper line to tell where one claim ended and another began. Only a rough basin of stone and sand, ringed by low rises, broken by thorn scrub and pale outcrops of rock. The wind moved through it with a dry, restless sound. The heat of the day still lived in the ground under my boots. The whole place looked abandoned by every generous thought God had ever had. And there, crouched against a shale rise, stood the remains of what the previous owner had called shelter. It was hardly more than a lean-to made from scavenged planks, patched tin, brush, and a length of weathered canvas. One side sagged low. The roof bowed in the middle. The doorway was only a dark opening cut into shadow. No porch. No true floor. No promise in it at all. My little brother Caleb looked up and asked, "Do people live in that?" "For now," my mother said. That answer chilled me more than the night air ever had. I climbed down from the wagon and turned in a slow circle, searching for something hopeful and finding almost nothing. No well in sight, no creek, no orchard, no patch of shade except a meager one thrown by the rock itself. Just distance, heat stored in stone, and silence so broad it made our wagon seem small and foolish sitting there in it. Fear came over me then, plain as a hand at my throat. We will fail here, I thought. Everyone was right. Everyone who laughed. But then my father stepped past me and stood looking over the claim, not like a beaten man, but like a carpenter studying warped lumber, trying to see if it could still be made square. My mother came beside him, lifting one hand to hold back her hair in the wind. My brother stayed close to the wagon wheel, suddenly quiet, and I understood all at once that no one was coming to rescue us from what we had chosen. Whatever this place would become, we would have to wrest it out of the desert ourselves. That was the moment something in me changed. Not softened, hardened. I looked at that useless piece of Arizona and felt the last of my old life falling away. I knew I would never go back to being the girl other people named before she had named herself. If I became anything, it would be here. That first night, while unloading the wagon, we found the previous owner's traces inside the ruined shelter. A stack of brittle notes wrapped in oilcloth, a few crude drawings, and lines written in a cramped hand about wind, soil pockets, morning shade, and one sentence that made my father stand very still before passing the paper to my mother. Water below. Not where you'd expect it. That was the first moment the land stopped looking empty. I read those notes by lantern light while the wind worried at the shelter walls and the boys slept under quilts that still smelled of wagon dust. The pages were brittle at the folds and marked with sweat, dirt, and the kind of careful shorthand a person uses when he is writing for himself, not for strangers. My father turned each sheet as if it might tear under its own age. My mother leaned in close, her shadow thrown large against the patched boards. I sat cross-legged on the hard ground beside them, trying to make sense of the cramped hand and the odd fragments of thought. Wind hardest from the southwest in late afternoon. Shade from the shale rise reaches 6 paces farther in October. Topsoil thin. Better pockets east of wash. Dig at dawn, not noon. Then, written darker than the rest, as if the writer had pressed the pencil harder there, water below. Not where you'd expect it. My father read that line 3 times. My mother said nothing at first, but I knew her silence. It was not doubt. It was calculation. She had already begun rearranging our future around that one possibility. Hidden water meant more than drinking. It meant maybe a place for a cistern, maybe a way to keep a few plants alive, maybe mud enough for better walls, maybe a reason this land had not entirely lied about itself. Outside, the dark spread fast. Desert dark is not like town dark. It does not come softened by nearby windows or fences or the ordinary sounds of other people settling for the night. It comes complete. The stars looked close enough to touch, and the open ground beyond our little shelter felt so large it might have swallowed us if we stepped too far from the lantern. Every sound seemed sharper in that emptiness. The scrape of tin, the creak of rope, the dry, ticking brush of sand against canvas. Far off, something yipped once and then again, thin and wild. Caleb crawled nearer to Mother in his sleep. Ben muttered and turned over. My father set the notes on an overturned crate and went out once more to check the wagon, the mule, the tied bundles, though there was little enough left to protect. He had the habit, when worried, of making one more round through a thing with his hands. Mother touched the top page and said, "He observed. That matters." "Or guessed," Father answered from the doorway. "No," she said. "A guess doesn't leave this much detail behind." I remember that because it was the first hopeful disagreement we had had in months. The next morning proved just how poor our shelter truly was. In daylight, the place looked worse, not better. The boards along the north side had warped apart, leaving finger-wide seams where light came through. The canvas patch on the roof had gone hard as bark and cracked near one corner. The floor was only tamped earth, uneven and gritty, with old mouse droppings in the far side and a smell of baked dust, dry wood, and something long abandoned. If a hard rain ever came through that basin, the whole thing would likely turn to a leaking box. Still, it was what we had. My father set to work before the sun rose high. He scavenged what the former owner had left. 2 straight poles, a half sheet of tin, a bent iron hook, a stack of stones near the shale rise that might once have formed a cooking place. My mother unpacked only what we could not do without. Kettle, flour, salt, bacon, coffee, needles, the small iron pot, blankets. She kept the rest covered, saying no sense in exposing all we owned to dust before we knew where anything belonged. I was sent first to gather brush for a windbreak, then to sweep the shelter clear with a mesquite branch tied tight for a broom. The dust rose so thick I had to turn my face and blink tears from my eyes. Every sweep uncovered some new offense: broken pegs, a rusted spoon bowl without a handle, lizard droppings, a twist of old cord, more notes tucked beneath a plank at the back wall. Those pages were different, less about the weather, more about the ground. Hard cap of caliche in places, softer seam beyond eastern stones, ants cluster where damp holds longest. Watch what grows after rare rain. That struck me. Not the words themselves, but the mind behind them. Someone had stood where I stood and chosen not merely to suffer the place, but to study it, to let the land show its habits before declaring it worthless. I had never heard anyone speak that way about harsh country. Men bragged over it, cursed it, fled it, bought it cheap, sold it cheaper. They did not usually listen to it. By noon, the heat came down fierce and white. The shelter held little shade, and what it gave smelled close and stale. My father had his shirt dark at the back and under the arms. My mother's face reddened across the nose, but she kept moving in that measured way of hers, as if pace itself were a form of wisdom. She sent me with a cup to wet the cloths for the boys' necks, then made us all sit a few minutes in the narrow shadow of the shale rise. No one said much. The heat took words from you. It was then, while I sat with my back against the warm stone and the notes folded in my lap, that I looked out over that broken basin and felt something change again inside me. The place was still brutal, still empty, still more likely to kill foolish people than reward them. But it no longer seemed mute. There were signs here, if a person paid attention. Wind, shade, soil pockets, ants, stone seams, morning cool, hidden water. The land was not giving itself freely. It was making terms, and for the first time, I thought we might learn them. He said it plain over coffee boiled black in the little iron pot, with the sunrise just beginning to strike the tops of the rocks. In that early light, the basin looked almost gentle, which was the desert's first deceit of the day. The heat had not yet risen. The wind had not yet begun to drag grit over the ground. Even the scrub looked softer then, silvered at the edges, as though the place might still be persuaded to kindness. But my father knew better than to believe a landscape before noon. "We start with the east side," he said, tapping the folded paper with one finger. "Softer seam beyond eastern stones. If the man lied, we lose a few hours. If he told the truth, we gain more than that." Mother handed him the spade and kept the notes for herself. She had already read them enough times that I think she could have spoken half the lines from memory. Ben and Caleb were set to gathering loose brush and dung for fuel, though Caleb mostly wandered and asked questions while Ben took the task seriously. I went with Father and Mother toward the eastern end of the claim, where the ground rose in a broken line of pale rock and the soil between looked no different to me than anywhere else, thin, dusty, and mean. That was another lesson the place taught me. What looks all one thing from a distance may prove full of difference when touched by hand. Father worked first with the shovel, then with the pick when the ground tightened under him. Mother crouched close, studying not the hole, but the earth cast up beside it. She rubbed it between her fingers, lifted it to smell it, even held one pinch to her tongue the way she sometimes tested flour. I watched the color change slowly as Father went down. Pale grit first, then a harder layer with white chunks in it. Then, beneath that, a denser band tinged faintly red. "Stop," Mother said. Father leaned on the handle, breathing through his nose. "What is it?" She pointed, and I saw it then. The soil at the bottom of the hole held shape differently. Less dead. "Again," she said. He drove the shovel down once more. The sound changed. Not much. Just enough to make all three of us still for a moment. A duller sound. A heavier one. Father knelt and broke the clod apart with both hands. The middle of it was cool. I remember that better than I remember my own birthday some years. The look that passed between my parents over a lump of earth no bigger than a loaf of bread. Not triumph. They were too careful for that. But recognition. The first true sign that the notes had not been written by a dreamer or a fool. Mother stood and shaded her eyes, looking over the line of stones, the wash, the rise beyond it. "Not water close to the top," she said, "but something holds under here." "A seep?" Father asked. "Maybe below. Maybe just trapped moisture where the seam runs. Enough to matter if it continues." He nodded once and dug 2 more test holes along the same line while the sun climbed. The second gave us little. The third gave us the same cool, dense earth again, and this time a scattering of green things nearby caught Mother's eye. Tiny, tough weeds tucked close to the rock where almost nothing else grew. "See that?" she said to me. I did. "They aren't here by accident." By midday, our hands were blistered and our water already warmer than it ought to have been, but we had something we had not possessed the day before. Not water itself, not safety, but a pattern, a clue. The hidden logic of the ground beginning to show through. Back at the shelter, Father scratched a rough map in the dirt with a stick while Mother compared it against the notes. I sat beside them and copied the marks onto a scrap of paper, though my writing was poorer and my lines crooked. The boys came in dusty and hungry, proud of the miserable little pile of fuel they had collected. Mother fried bacon ends with cornmeal into a rough mash, and we ate in silence under the broken shade of the lean-to. That afternoon, the wind came hard from the southwest, just as the notes had said. It struck the shelter broadside and found every weakness in it at once. Dust pushed through the seams in fine streams. The canvas roof patch snapped and banged. One loose board knocked like a trapped thing until Father nailed it fast with the last of the shorter tacks. Caleb began to cry from the noise and the grit in his eyes, and Mother tied a damp cloth over his nose and mouth while I held the pot steady against the shaking table crate. It would have been easy then to give in to fear. The shelter was poor. The land was hard. The wind seemed bent on reminding us that we had no proper business there. But late in the day, when the gusts eased, Father walked back to the eastern stones and stood over those test holes with his hands on his hips. Mother came beside him. I followed a little behind. The whole basin lay open around us, red in the lowering light, and for the first time I noticed something I had missed before. The line of rock, the cooler seam, the small weeds, even the path of the wash, they all belonged to one another. The place was not random. Harsh, yes. Unforgiving, yes. But not random. And standing there in the wind-scoured evening, with dust on my teeth and my scalp sore from the sun, I felt the smallest stir of pride. Not because we had done anything great yet, only because we had begun by paying attention, which was more than the people who laughed had ever done.